The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Marcus Navarro heard the mountain groan like a dying beast, and in that moment he knew the canyon road where Rose Sullivan traveled was about to become her grave. He had been tracking her wagon since dawn, staying far enough back that she would not notice him, but close enough to make sure she stayed safe. It was not the first time he had followed her route from Eagle Pass, Texas, into the rocky terrain beyond. Rose made the journey every 2 weeks to visit her sister in the settlement of Del Rio, and Marcus had appointed himself her silent guardian ever since the day 6 months ago when he had seen her smile at him across the general store counter. That smile had burned itself into his memory like a brand on cattle hide, and he had been lost ever since. Marcus was 26 years old and had spent the last 8 years working cattle ranches across Texas, saving every penny he could. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of strong coffee. His hands were calloused from years of rope work, and his face was weathered from sun and wind, but there was a gentleness in him that most cowboys lacked. He had seen too much hardness in the world to want to add more to it. Rose Sullivan was 23 and had moved to Eagle Pass 2 years earlier with her father after her mother died of fever. She had hair the color of autumn wheat that she wore in a practical braid, and eyes that shifted between green and gray depending on the light. She was not classically beautiful in the way of the painted ladies in the saloons, but there was something about her that caught the eye and held it. She had a directness in her gaze and a capable way of moving that suggested she could handle whatever life threw at her. Marcus had never spoken more than a dozen words to her, but he knew with absolute certainty that she was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. The problem was that Rose was being courted by Thomas Garrett, the son of the richest rancher in the county. Thomas was handsome in a polished way that Marcus could never hope to match, and he had the kind of money that could give Rose a comfortable life. Marcus had nothing but a horse, a saddle, and $200 saved up. He had no right to approach her, no right even to dream about her, but he could not seem to stop himself from doing both. The rain had started 3 days ago as a gentle spring shower, the kind that was welcome after a dry winter. But it had not stopped, and as the hours passed, it had grown heavier and more insistent. The ground in this part of Texas was hard-packed clay that did not absorb water well, and Marcus had watched with growing unease as the arroyos began to fill and the hillsides turned slick and unstable. When he woke that morning and saw Rose preparing her wagon for the journey to Del Rio, he had nearly broken his silence to warn her not to go. But she had looked so determined, and he had no legitimate reason to speak to her, so he had simply saddled his horse and followed at a distance. Now, as the mountain made that terrible groaning sound, Marcus dug his heels into his horse's flanks and urged the animal forward. He could see Rose's wagon ahead, moving slowly along the canyon road. The walls of the canyon rose steeply on either side, and water was pouring down them in sheets. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but the sound that came from the mountain drowned out his voice. The mudslide started high up on the western slope, where weeks of drought had left the soil loose and the recent rain had saturated it past the point of stability. Marcus saw it begin as a dark stain spreading across the hillside, and then suddenly the entire slope was moving, tons of mud and rock and debris sliding down toward the canyon road with terrifying speed. Rose must have heard it or sensed it, because she turned her head and looked up at the hillside. Even from a distance, Marcus could see her eyes widen with fear. She grabbed the reins and tried to urge her horses faster, but the wagon was heavy and the road was slick. The animals lunged forward, but it was not enough. The mudslide hit the canyon road just behind the wagon, and then it kept coming, a wall of liquid earth that moved with the force of a river in flood. Marcus watched in horror as the mud overtook the wagon. He saw Rose stand up, saw her try to jump clear, and then the wagon was tumbling sideways, and Rose was disappearing into the churning brown mass. The horses screamed and went down, still tangled in their harness. The wagon disintegrated like kindling, and Rose vanished completely beneath the mud. The slide seemed to last forever, but it probably took less than a minute. When it finally stopped, the canyon road was buried under 6 feet of mud and debris. The rain continued to fall, turning the surface into a slick, treacherous soup. Marcus did not remember dismounting from his horse. He found himself running toward the slide, his boots slipping in the mud, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He had seen where Rose went down, had marked the spot in his mind even as the slide was still moving. He reached the edge of the debris field and started climbing across it, sinking to his knees with every step. The mud sucked at his boots and tried to pull him down. He fell twice and dragged himself back up, his eyes scanning the churning surface for any sign of Rose. There was nothing, just an expanse of brown mud studded with rocks and broken pieces of wagon. He tried to call her name, but his voice came out as a ragged gasp. He reached the spot where he thought she had gone down and dropped to his knees. The mud was thick and heavy, like wet concrete. He started digging with his hands, scooping away handfuls of the stuff and throwing it aside. It was immediately replaced by more mud sliding down from above. He dug faster, his breath coming in harsh pants. "Rose!" he shouted. "Rose, can you hear me?" There was no answer except the drumming of the rain and the gurgle of water running through the mud. Marcus kept digging. His hands were already raw from the rocks and debris mixed in with the mud, but he did not slow down. He could not slow down. Rose was under there somewhere, and every second that passed reduced her chances of survival. He dug down 2 feet and found nothing but more mud. He moved a few feet to the left and started again, his fingers clawing at the earth like an animal. The rain ran down his face and mixed with the sweat pouring off him, despite the coolness of the day. His back and arms were screaming with effort, but he ignored the pain. "Rose!" he shouted again. "Hold on, Rose!" He dug for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. His hands were bleeding now, the skin torn away by rocks and the rough wooden debris from the wagon. The blood mixed with the mud and made his grip slippery. He wiped his hands on his shirt and kept digging. Then his fingers hit something that was not mud or rock, something that felt like fabric. He grabbed it and pulled, and a piece of blue cloth came free. It was from Rose's dress. He had seen her wearing it that morning. Marcus felt a surge of hope so strong it was almost painful. He dug around the spot where he had found the fabric, working faster now, ignoring the way his torn fingers screamed in protest. He found more fabric, and then his hand touched something warm, skin, an arm. "I have got you," he said, his voice breaking. "I have got you, Rose. Hold on." He dug frantically around her arm, following it up to her shoulder and then to her head. Her face was covered in mud, her eyes closed. He could not tell if she was breathing. He scooped the mud away from her nose and mouth with trembling hands, then pressed his ear to her chest. For a terrible moment, he heard nothing, and then there it was, faint but unmistakable. A heartbeat. She was alive. Marcus dug around her body, working as fast as he could while trying to be careful not to hurt her. She was buried deep, her legs pinned under something heavy. He could not see what it was through the mud. He dug down along her side, and his hand hit rough wood. Part of the wagon, probably the side panel. It was lying across her legs. He tried to lift it, but it would not budge. It was too heavy, or it was pinned under something else. Marcus braced his feet in the mud and put his back into it, straining with everything he had. The wood shifted slightly but did not lift. He adjusted his grip, ignoring the way the rough splinters dug into his bleeding palms, and tried again. This time the panel lifted enough for him to slide it off Rose's legs. He threw it aside and went back to digging, clearing the mud away from her legs and feet. When she was finally free, he slid his arms under her body and lifted her out of the mud. She was limp and heavy in his arms, her head lolling back. Marcus carried her away from the slide zone, his boots sliding in the mud with every step. He made it to higher ground and laid her down on a patch of grass that was relatively dry under the shelter of an overhanging rock. Rose's face was pale under the coating of mud, her lips tinged with blue. Marcus cleaned the mud from her mouth and nose again, then tilted her head back and checked her airway. It seemed clear. He could still feel her heartbeat when he pressed his fingers to her throat, but it was weak and thready. "Come on, Rose," he said. "Breathe for me. Come on." He was not sure if she was getting enough air. Her chest was barely moving. Marcus remembered something he had seen a doctor do once, years ago, when a ranch hand had nearly drowned in a river. He pinched Rose's nose shut, tilted her head back, and pressed his mouth to hers, breathing air into her lungs. He did it once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th breath, Rose suddenly convulsed and coughed. Mud and water came out of her mouth. Marcus quickly turned her on her side so she would not choke, and she coughed again, her whole body shaking with the effort. "That is it," Marcus said, his hand on her back. "Get it out. You are all right. You are safe." Rose coughed for what seemed like a long time, bringing up more mud and water. Finally, the coughing subsided, and her breathing began to even out. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What happened?" "Mudslide," Marcus said. "It buried your wagon. You were under there. Do not try to move yet. Just rest." Rose's eyes tried to focus on his face. "Who are you?" "Marcus Navarro. I was riding behind you on the road. I saw the slide come down." "You pulled me out," Rose said. It was not a question, more like she was trying to make sense of what had happened. "Yes." "My horses," she said, and there was anguish in her voice. "The wagon." "I am sorry," Marcus said gently. "The horses did not make it. The wagon is destroyed." Tears welled up in Rose's eyes and spilled down her muddy cheeks. "They were good animals. They did not deserve that." "No, they did not," Marcus agreed. "I am sorry." Rose closed her eyes for a moment, and Marcus thought she might have lost consciousness again. But then she opened them and looked at him more clearly. "You are bleeding." Marcus looked down at his hands. They were a mess, the skin torn and ragged, blood mixing with the mud. "It is nothing. I will clean them up later." "You dug me out with your hands," Rose said, and there was wonder in her voice now. "You dug until you bled. I could not leave you under there. You do not even know me." "I know enough," Marcus said. Then, because he could not seem to stop himself, he added, "I have seen you in town, at the general store. You smiled at me once." Rose stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. "I remember," she said softly. "You were buying supplies for a trail drive. You tipped your hat to me." "Yes." "Why were you riding behind me today?" Marcus felt heat rise in his face despite the rain. "I wanted to make sure you got to Del Rio safely. The weather was bad. I thought maybe if you had trouble with the wagon or the road, I could help." "You followed me to keep me safe," Rose said. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes." "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me," Rose said, and her voice broke on the last word. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Rose said firmly. "They would not have. Most men would have turned back when the rain started. You followed me anyway, and when the slide came down, you did not hesitate. You just started digging." She reached up with one mud-covered hand and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his cheek. "Thank you, Marcus Navarro." Marcus felt like he could not breathe. Her hand on his face was the most wonderful thing he had ever felt, even though it was covered in mud and they were both soaked to the skin from the rain. "You are welcome, Rose Sullivan." Her eyes widened. "You know my name?" "I asked around," Marcus admitted. "After I saw you at the store, I wanted to know who you were." "Why?" "Because I could not stop thinking about you." The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus immediately wished he could take them back. This was not the time or place for such a confession. Rose had just survived a mudslide. She was injured and in shock and in no condition to be hearing about his feelings for her. But the words were out now, and he could not unsay them. Rose was staring at him with an expression he could not read. "I need to get you out of this rain," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "We need to find shelter and get you warm. Can you walk?" "I think so," Rose said. She tried to sit up and gasped in pain, her hand going to her ribs. "Easy," Marcus said. "You might have broken something. Let me help you." He slid his arm around her back and helped her sit up slowly. Rose's face was pale and tight with pain, but she did not cry out. Marcus could see she was the kind of woman who would endure without complaint, which only made him admire her more. "I do not think anything is broken," Rose said after a moment. "Just bruised. Everything hurts, but I can move." "We will take it slow," Marcus said. "My horse is over there. I will help you mount, and we will ride back to Eagle Pass." "That is hours away," Rose said. "There is a line shack about a mile from here, up in the hills. My sister's husband told me about it. He uses it sometimes when he is moving cattle through this area. It will be closer than trying to get back to town." Marcus knew the kind of line shack she meant. Small one-room cabins that ranchers built in remote areas to shelter cowboys during roundups or trail drives. They were rough but serviceable, and most importantly, they would be dry. "Can you tell me how to find it?" Rose gave him directions as best she could, and Marcus helped her to her feet. She swayed and would have fallen if he had not caught her. He lifted her into his arms without asking permission, and she did not protest. She was shivering now, her wet clothes clinging to her body. Marcus carried her to where his horse was waiting. The animal had stayed put despite the mudslide, which spoke well of his training. Marcus managed to get Rose into the saddle, then mounted behind her. He wrapped one arm around her waist to hold her steady and took the reins with his other hand. The ride to the line shack was slow and difficult. The rain had not let up, and the hillside was slippery with running water. Marcus was terrified that his horse would lose its footing, and they would both go down. Rose was leaning back against him, and he could feel her shivering getting worse. He needed to get her warm and dry as soon as possible. It took nearly 2 hours to find the line shack, even with Rose's directions. It was tucked into a stand of trees on a hillside, a small, rough structure made of weathered wood. Marcus dismounted and helped Rose down, then led his horse around to the lean to shelter on the side of the shack where it could get out of the rain. The door of the shack was not locked. Marcus pushed it open and helped Rose inside. The interior was dim and smelled of old wood smoke and mice, but it was dry. There was a small iron stove in one corner, a rough wooden bunk against one wall, a table and 2 chairs, and not much else. But it was shelter, and that was all that mattered. Marcus settled Rose in one of the chairs, then went back outside to his horse. He pulled his bedroll and saddlebags from the saddle, along with the rifle that was always strapped there. He carried everything inside and dropped it on the floor, then went back out to tend to the horse. He rubbed the animal down as best he could with handfuls of grass, then made sure it had access to the lean to shelter and left it to rest. Back inside the shack, Marcus found Rose slumped in the chair, her eyes half closed. Her lips were still blue, and she was shivering violently. Marcus knew he needed to get her out of those wet clothes and warm her up before hypothermia set in. "Rose," he said gently, "I need to get a fire going, and you need to get out of those wet clothes." Rose's eyes opened slightly. "I am so cold," she whispered. "I know. I am going to fix that." Marcus went to the stove and opened it. There was old ash inside and a few pieces of charred wood. He looked around the shack and found a box of kindling and firewood stacked against one wall. Someone had left it well stocked, probably the rancher who owned it. Marcus built a fire quickly, his torn hands making the work painful but not impossible. The kindling caught and the flames began to grow. He added larger pieces of wood and soon had a good fire going. Heat began to radiate from the stove. He turned back to Rose. She was watching him with heavy-lidded eyes. "You need to change into dry clothes," he said. "Do you have anything in your bags?" "My bags were in the wagon," Rose said. "They are gone." Marcus cursed under his breath. He went to his saddlebags and pulled out the spare shirt he always carried. It would be huge on her, but it was dry. "You can wear this. I will turn my back. Can you manage on your own, or do you need help?" "I can manage," Rose said, but when she tried to stand her legs buckled. Marcus caught her before she fell. "Let me help," he said. "I will be respectful, I promise." Rose looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Marcus helped her over to the bunk and sat her down on the edge. The mud on her dress had dried into a stiff crust. He found the buttons at the back of the dress and began unfastening them with trembling fingers. It felt terribly intimate, but he kept his touch clinical and his eyes averted as much as possible. When the dress was unbuttoned, he helped Rose slide it off her shoulders and down her arms. She was wearing a simple cotton chemise and petticoat underneath, and they were just as wet and muddy as the dress. Marcus hesitated, his sense of propriety warring with the knowledge that she needed to get warm. "It is all right," Rose said quietly. "I trust you." Those words meant more to Marcus than she could possibly know. He helped her out of the wet undergarments, keeping his eyes firmly fixed on her face. When she was down to just her skin, he quickly wrapped her in the blanket from his bedroll, then handed her his spare shirt. Rose put it on under the blanket, and Marcus turned away while she arranged herself. "You can look now," she said after a moment. Marcus turned back. Rose was bundled in the blanket with his shirt on underneath. Her wet hair was plastered to her head, and her face was still smudged with mud, but she looked a little less like she was about to die of cold. "Your turn," Rose said. "You are just as wet as I was, and you need to take care of those hands." Marcus looked down at his hands. They were still bleeding sluggishly, the torn skin angry and raw. Now that the immediate crisis was over, they were starting to hurt quite a bit. "I will be fine. Do not be stubborn," Rose said. "You saved my life. The least I can do is help you clean up your hands." Marcus started to protest, but the look on Rose's face stopped him. She was not going to take no for an answer. He stripped off his wet shirt and draped it over one of the chairs near the stove to dry. His undershirt was also wet, so he took that off too. He saw Rose's eyes widen slightly at the sight of his bare chest, but she did not look away. "There should be water in the barrel outside," Rose said, "and I think I saw a tin cup on the table." Marcus found the cup and went outside to fill it from the rain barrel. The water was cold and clear. He brought it back inside and set it on the table. Rose had gotten up from the bunk and was going through the cupboards built into one wall of the shack. "Sit down," she told him. "Let me look at your hands." Marcus sat in one of the chairs, and Rose pulled the other chair close. She took his right hand in both of hers and examined it in the light from the stove. Her touch was gentle, but Marcus could not help wincing when her fingers brushed the torn skin. "This is bad," she said quietly. "Some of these cuts are deep. They need to be cleaned out or they will fester." "I know," Marcus said, "but we do not have much in the way of supplies." Rose went back to the cupboards and emerged with a mostly full bottle of whiskey. "This will do," she said. "It is going to hurt." "I have had worse," Marcus said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. Rose poured some of the whiskey into the tin cup, then took Marcus's hand and held it over the empty basin she had found in one of the cupboards. "Ready?" Marcus nodded. Rose poured the whiskey over his torn fingers. The pain was immediate and intense, like liquid fire running through his hand. Marcus sucked in his breath through his teeth, but did not cry out. Rose worked carefully, using a piece of cloth she had found to clean the mud and blood from the wounds. When she was done with his right hand, she moved to his left. That one was not quite as bad, but it still hurt like hell when the whiskey hit the raw skin. Marcus focused on Rose's face while she worked, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way she bit her lower lip when she was being especially careful. Even covered in dried mud with her hair in disarray, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "There," Rose said finally. "I wish I had some bandages, but at least they are clean now." "Thank you," Marcus said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Rose looked up at him, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marcus was acutely aware of how close she was, of the fact that she was wearing nothing but his shirt and a blanket, of the fact that they were alone in this cabin with the rain pounding on the roof outside. "You should rest," he said, breaking the moment. "You have been through a terrible ordeal." "So have you," Rose pointed out. "When did you last eat?" Marcus tried to remember. He had left Eagle Pass before dawn to follow Rose's wagon. "Yesterday evening, I think." "That is what I thought." Rose got up and went back to the cupboards. She found a tin of beans and some hardtack. "It is not much, but it is something." "You do not need to cook for me," Marcus protested. "I am not cooking," Rose said. "I am opening a tin, and we both need to eat something." She heated the beans on the stove and divided them between 2 tin plates she found in the cupboard. The hardtack was old and tough, but it was edible. They ate in silence, sitting at the small table while the fire crackled in the stove and the rain drummed on the roof. When they were done, Rose began to shiver again, despite the warmth from the fire. Marcus realized that she was probably going into shock, the adrenaline from the ordeal wearing off and leaving her body to deal with the trauma. "You need to lie down," he said. "Get some proper rest." Rose did not argue. She went to the bunk and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Marcus added more wood to the fire, then sat in one of the chairs and tried to get comfortable. He was bone-tired, but he wanted to stay awake in case Rose needed anything. "Marcus," Rose said from the bunk. Her voice was soft and drowsy. "Yes?" "Thank you. For everything. For digging me out, for bringing me here, for taking care of me. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Marcus said. "I am just glad you are all right." There was a pause, and then Rose said, "You told me you could not stop thinking about me. Did you mean that?" Marcus felt his heart start to pound. "Yes, I meant it." "Why did you never speak to me before today? At the store or around town?" "Because you are being courted by Thomas Garrett," Marcus said, "and I am just a cowboy with nothing to offer you. I had no right to approach you." "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard," Rose said, and there was heat in her voice now. "Thomas Garrett is courting me because his father told him to. He thinks I will make a suitable wife because I can read and write and I am not bad looking. He has never asked me what I want or what I dream about. He has never followed me through the rain to make sure I was safe. He would never have dug through a mudslide with his bare hands to save me." Marcus did not know what to say to that. He sat in silence, his heart racing. "Come here," Rose said. What? Come here, please. Marcus got up and walked over to the bunk. Rose had pushed herself up on one elbow and was looking at him with an expression that made his breath catch. There is only one bunk, she said, and you are exhausted. Lie down with me. We will keep each other warm. Rose, I do not think that is appropriate. I do not care about appropriate, Rose said. You saved my life today. I am not going to make you sleep in a chair. Now lie down before you fall down. Marcus knew he should refuse, knew that sharing a bunk with her was crossing a line, but he was so tired he could barely think straight. And the thought of lying next to her, of holding her while they slept, was too tempting to resist. He lay down on the bunk, and Rose immediately curled up against him, her head on his chest and the blanket pulled over both of them. Marcus wrapped his arms around her carefully, afraid he might hurt her injuries. Is this all right? He asked. This is perfect, Rose murmured. She was already half asleep, her breathing starting to even out. Marcus lay awake for a while longer, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. He could feel her heart beating against his ribs, could smell the scent of her hair even through the mud that still coated it. This was the most wonderful and terrifying moment of his life. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and he drifted off to sleep. Marcus woke to bright sunlight streaming through the grimy window of the lined shack. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, and from the angle of the sun, it looked to be mid-morning. Rose was still asleep in his arms, breathing softly and evenly. He could see that some color had returned to her face, which was a good sign. He lay still, not wanting to wake her, and used the time to think about what would happen next. They needed to get back to Eagle Pass, but it would be a long walk since Rose's wagon and horses were gone. His horse could carry them both, but it would be slow going, and when they got back to town, there would be questions. People would want to know where they had been, what they had been doing. The fact that they had spent the night alone together in a line shack would cause talk, no matter how innocent the circumstances. Rose stirred and opened her eyes. For a moment she looked confused, and then memory returned and she looked up at Marcus. Good morning, she said softly. Good morning. How do you feel? Sore, Rose admitted. Everything hurts, but I am alive, so I'm not going to complain. She sat up slowly, wincing as she moved. Marcus sat up beside her, careful not to crowd her. In the bright morning light, he could see the full extent of the bruising on her arms and the scratches on her face from the debris in the mudslide. We should head back to Eagle Pass, Marcus said. People will be worried about you. I know, Rose said. She looked down at herself, still wearing only his shirt and the blanket. But I cannot exactly ride into town like this. Your dress should be dry by now, Marcus said. He got up and went to check the clothes they had draped over the chairs the night before. Rose's dress was dry but stiff with dried mud, and there were several tears in the fabric. His shirt and undershirt were also dry. It is not pretty, but it will do, Rose said, taking the dress from him. Turn around. Marcus turned his back and pulled on his undershirt and shirt, while Rose dressed behind him. When he turned back, she was standing in the muddy, torn dress, looking uncomfortable, but covered. I look like I have been through a war, she said with a wry smile. You look beautiful, Marcus said before he could stop himself. Rose's cheeks flushed pink. You are very kind, but I think we both know that is not true. I am not being kind. I am being honest. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, and Marcus saw something shift in Rose's expression. She crossed the small space between them and reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle on his unshaven jaw. I meant what I said last night, she said, about Thomas Garrett. I do not want to marry him. I have been trying to find a way to tell him that without causing trouble between our families, but I have not had the courage. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked, though his heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Because I want you to know that I am not spoken for. That if a certain cowboy wanted to call on me properly, I would welcome it. Marcus felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Rose, I do not have much to offer you. I have been saving money, but it is not anywhere near what Thomas Garrett could give you. I do not want Thomas Garrett's money, Rose said firmly. I want someone who sees me as a person, not as a suitable wife. I want someone who would dig through a mudslide with his bare hands for me. I want someone who would follow me through a storm just to make sure I was safe. She paused, her eyes searching his face. I want you, Marcus Navarro, if you want me. Marcus felt like his chest was going to explode. I have wanted you since the first moment I saw you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I just never thought you could want me too." "Then you were not paying attention," Rose said. "I smiled at you in that store because I wanted you to notice me. I was hoping you would come talk to me, but you just tipped your hat and left. I thought you were not interested." "Not interested?" Marcus let out a choked laugh. "Rose, I have been half in love with you for 6 months. I was just too afraid to say anything." "Then say it now," Rose whispered. Marcus cupped her face in his bandaged hands, mindful of his injuries but unable to stop himself from touching her. "I love you, Rose Sullivan. I think I have loved you from the moment you smiled at me, and I will love you until the day I die." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she said. "I did not realize it until yesterday, when I woke up and saw you there and understood what you had done for me, but I think maybe I have been falling in love with you this whole time without knowing it." Marcus kissed her then, gently at first, and then with more passion as she responded. She tasted like hope and new beginnings, and he thought he could happily spend the rest of his life kissing her. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "We should probably get back to town," Rose said, sounding reluctant. "Probably," Marcus agreed, equally reluctant to break the spell of the moment. They gathered up their few belongings and left the line shack. Marcus made sure the fire in the stove was completely out and the door was secured, a courtesy to the rancher who owned the place. Then he helped Rose onto his horse and mounted behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to hold her secure. The ride back to Eagle Pass took most of the day. The roads were muddy from the rain, and Marcus had to take it slow to keep the horse from slipping, but he did not mind. Having Rose in his arms, feeling the warmth of her body against his, was worth any amount of delay. They talked as they rode, really talked for the first time. Rose told him about growing up in Mississippi, about how her mother had died of yellow fever, and how her father had decided to move west for a fresh start. She talked about her sister Anna, who had married a rancher and moved to Del Rio, and how much she missed her. Marcus told her about his own family, about growing up on a small ranch in South Texas and learning to work cattle from his father. He told her about how his parents had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 18, and how he had been on his own ever since. "You have been alone for a long time," Rose said softly. "I have," Marcus agreed, "but I do not feel alone anymore." They reached Eagle Pass just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. As they rode into town, people stopped what they were doing to stare. Marcus could see the shock on their faces as they took in Rose's torn and muddy dress and his bandaged hands. Rose's father was standing on the porch of the boarding house where they lived, and when he saw them coming, he let out a shout and ran into the street. "Rose, thank God! Where have you been? I have been worried sick." Marcus helped Rose down from the horse, and her father swept her into his arms, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear. "What happened? Why are you dressed like that? Are you hurt?" "I am all right, Papa," Rose said. "There was a mudslide on the canyon road. It buried my wagon. Marcus saved me." Her father turned to look at Marcus, and there was an expression in his eyes that Marcus could not quite read. "You saved my daughter's life?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "I happened to be riding the same road. I saw the slide come down." "Happened to be riding the same road," Rose's father repeated. He looked from Marcus to Rose and back again, and Marcus saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "I see." A crowd had gathered now, and Thomas Garrett pushed his way through. He was a tall man with sandy hair and good looks that came from regular meals and a life free of hard labor. When he saw Rose, his eyes widened. "Rose, what on earth happened to you?" "There was a mudslide," Rose said, and Marcus could hear the weariness in her voice. "Thomas, I need to speak with you privately." "Of course," Thomas said, "but first we should get you cleaned up and looked after. You look terrible." It was the wrong thing to say. Marcus saw Rose's expression harden, and he knew that whatever small chance Thomas might have had with her had just evaporated completely. "I need to speak with you now," Rose said firmly. She turned to Marcus. "Will you wait for me?" "As long as you need," Marcus said. Rose and Thomas walked a short distance away, far enough that Marcus could not hear what they were saying, but close enough that he could see the expressions on their faces. Thomas looked confused at first, then disbelieving, then angry. He raised his voice loud enough that Marcus caught the words inappropriate and reputation. Rose's voice stayed calm and firm. After a few minutes, Thomas turned on his heel and stalked away, his face flushed with anger. Rose came back to Marcus and took his hand, uncaring that half the town was watching. "I broke it off with him," she said. "I told him I'm in love with someone else." There were gasps from the crowd, and Marcus heard someone whisper his name. Rose's father was watching them with a complicated expression that was equal parts concern and resignation. "Rose, can we talk?" her father said. "Inside, please." Rose squeezed Marcus's hand. "Wait for me," she said again. And then she followed her father into the boarding house. Marcus stood in the street, feeling the eyes of the entire town on him. He led his horse to the livery stable and paid to have the animal fed and rubbed down, then walked back to the boarding house and sat on the steps to wait. His hands were throbbing and his whole body ached, but he would wait there all night if that was what it took. He did not have to wait that long. After about 30 minutes, Rose came back out. Her face was streaked with tears, but she was smiling. "My father wants to meet you," she said. "Properly, I mean. He wants to know about your intentions toward me." Marcus stood up. "My intentions are entirely honorable," he said. "I want to court her properly, with your permission. And if she will have me, I want to marry her someday." "Then come inside and tell him that," Rose said. Marcus followed her into the boarding house. Rose's father, Samuel Sullivan, was sitting at the table in their small parlor. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years of hard work. He gestured for Marcus to sit down. "My daughter tells me you saved her life," Samuel said without preamble. "Yes, sir. She also tells me you have been in love with her for 6 months, but never said anything because you thought you were not good enough for her." Marcus felt heat rise in his face. "That is accurate, sir. And now you want to court her?" "Yes, sir, with your permission." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. "What do you do for a living, Mr. Navarro?" "I work cattle, sir. I have been saving money to buy my own piece of land. I have $200 put away so far." $200 is not much." "No, sir, it is not. But I am a hard worker, and I will provide for your daughter the best I can." "My daughter was being courted by one of the richest young men in the county," Samuel said. "He could have given her a comfortable life." "I know that, sir, but she did not love him." "And she loves you?" "She says she does, sir, and I love her more than anything in this world." Samuel was quiet for a moment, and then he sighed. "I can see that you are sincere, and my daughter is a grown woman who can make her own choices. If she wants you to court her, I will not stand in the way, but I expect you to treat her with respect and honor. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. I give you my word." "Then you have my permission," Samuel said. "But if you hurt her, I will make you regret it." "You will not have to worry about that, sir. I would rather die than hurt her." Samuel nodded, then stood and extended his hand. Marcus shook it and felt the older man's grip was firm and strong. "Welcome to the family, Mr. Navarro," Samuel said. "I have a feeling I will be seeing a lot more of you." Over the next few months, Marcus courted Rose properly, the way she deserved. He would come to the boarding house several evenings a week and sit with her in the parlor, chaperoned by her father. They talked about everything under the sun, their hopes and dreams and fears. Marcus told her about his plan to buy land and start his own ranch, and Rose told him about her dream of having a family and a home of her own. Marcus continued to work cattle drives and saved every penny he could. Rose helped her father run the boarding house and took in sewing on the side to add to her own savings. They were building toward a future together, one step at a time. The town gossip about them eventually died down, though Thomas Garrett made sure everyone knew that Rose had thrown away a good match for a penniless cowboy. Marcus ignored the talk. He knew that Rose loved him, and that was all that mattered. 6 months after the mudslide, Marcus had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land about 5 miles outside of Eagle Pass. It was not much, just 40 acres with a creek running through it, but it was his. He built a small cabin on the property with his own hands, working every spare moment he had. Rose came out to see it several times while he was building, and she would bring food and sit with him while he ate, offering suggestions about where to put windows and how to arrange the rooms. When the cabin was finally finished, Marcus asked Rose to marry him. It was not a fancy proposal. He just took her hand while they were sitting on the porch of the cabin watching the sunset and said, "Rose Sullivan, will you marry me and make this house a home?" Rose said yes before he even finished the question. They were married in the small church in Eagle Pass on a warm day in October of 1876. Rose wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Marcus wore his best shirt and pants and the only tie he owned. Samuel Sullivan walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and the church was packed with people from town who wanted to see the couple who had survived a mudslide get their happy ending. After the ceremony, there was a reception at the boarding house. People brought food and gifts, more than Marcus had expected. Even some of the men he had worked cattle drives with showed up to congratulate him. Thomas Garrett did not attend, which was probably for the best. As the sun set, Marcus and Rose rode out to their new home together. Marcus carried Rose over the threshold of the cabin, and she laughed with delight. "It is perfect," she said, looking around at the simple interior. "It is everything I dreamed of." "It is just a cabin," Marcus said. "Nothing fancy." "It is ours," Rose said firmly. "That makes it perfect." They made love for the first time that night, gentle and tentative and full of wonder. Afterward, Rose lay in Marcus's arms and traced the scars on his hands, the ones that had never fully faded from the day he dug her out of the mud. "Every time I see these scars, I remember what you did for me," she said softly. "You dug until your fingers bled." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Marcus said. "I would dig through mountains for you." "I know you would," Rose said. "That is why I love you." The first year of their marriage was hard work, but full of joy. Marcus built up his small herd of cattle, starting with 10 head that he bought with his savings and adding to them as he could. Rose planted a garden and kept chickens and made their little cabin into a real home. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, and at night they fell into bed exhausted but happy. In the spring of 1877, Rose told Marcus she was pregnant. He was so overjoyed he picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh and scold him at the same time for being reckless. He immediately became overprotective, trying to keep her from doing any heavy work, but Rose would have none of it. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly. "I can still carry water and feed chickens." Their son was born in December of 1877, during a cold snap that left frost on the ground. Marcus paced outside the bedroom while the midwife from town helped Rose through the labor, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, he thought his heart would burst from happiness. The midwife emerged and told him he could come in, and Marcus went to find Rose propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said. Marcus looked down at the baby and felt tears prick his eyes. The boy had dark hair like his and Rose's green-gray eyes. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "What should we name him?" Rose asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Marcus thought for a moment, then said, "Samuel, after your father, if that is all right with you." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "That is more than all right. Samuel Marcus Navarro. It has a good sound to it." They raised Samuel with love and discipline, teaching him to be honest and hard-working and kind. The ranch grew slowly but steadily over the years. Marcus added to their cattle herd and bought more land when he could afford it. Rose kept the house and garden and helped with the ranch work when Samuel was old enough to be left with his grandfather in town for a few hours. 3 years after Samuel was born, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Anna after Rose's sister. 2 years after that came another daughter, Elizabeth. The little cabin became crowded, so Marcus added on 2 more rooms and a larger porch. It was still humble compared to some of the big ranches in the area, but it was theirs, and it was paid for, and that meant everything. The children grew up strong and healthy, running wild on the ranch land, and learning to ride and rope and work cattle alongside their father. Samuel proved to have a natural talent with horses, and Marcus was proud to watch his son grow into a capable young man. Anna was quieter, but had her mother's quick mind and gentle hands, and she often helped Rose with the garden and the cooking. Elizabeth was the wild one, always climbing trees and getting into mischief, and she reminded Marcus so much of Rose that it made his heart ache. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. Marcus and Rose grew older together, their faces weathering under the Texas sun, but their love never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when they thought the children were not looking. Every year on their anniversary, Marcus would take Rose back to the spot where the line shack had been, and they would remember the day that changed both their lives. Samuel Sullivan lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren grow up. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1889, and Marcus and Rose buried him in the cemetery outside Eagle Pass. Rose grieved for her father, but she found comfort in the family she had built and the life she had created. By 1890, the ranch had grown to 300 acres with a herd of nearly 200 cattle. Marcus hired help during roundup and branding season, young cowboys who reminded him of himself at that age. Samuel was 22 now, and running much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, proving himself to be as capable as his father. Anna was 19, and being courted by a young man from town, a school teacher with kind eyes and good prospects. Elizabeth was 17 and showing no signs of settling down, much to Rose's amusement. Marcus was 49 years old, and his hair was going gray, but he could still work a full day, and he still looked at his wife with the same love and wonder he had felt the day he pulled her from the mud. The scars on his hands had faded to thin white lines, but they were still there, a permanent reminder of the day his life truly began. One evening in early summer, Marcus and Rose sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The children were all in town for various reasons, and they had the house to themselves for once. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rose asked, reaching over to take his hand. "The mudslide." "All the time," Marcus admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I ever really had you. It terrifies me even now." "I think about it too," Rose said. "I think about how I would have died under all that mud if you had not been there. I think about how different my life would have been if I had never met you." "You would have married Thomas Garrett and lived in a big house and had servants," Marcus said. "I would have been miserable," Rose said firmly. "I would have had comfort, but not love. I would have had security, but not joy." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me everything that matters, Marcus. You gave me love and partnership and a family. You gave me a life worth living." Marcus brought her hand to his lips and kissed her scarred knuckles, earned from years of hard work. "You gave me the same," he said. "I was just drifting before I met you, working for wages and saving money without any real purpose. You gave me something to build toward, something to fight for. You made me want to be a better man." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Then Rose said, "Samuel told me today that he wants to ask the Johnson girl to marry him." Marcus felt a pang in his chest. His son was a man now, ready to start his own family. Time had moved so fast. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that if he loves her the way his father loves his mother, then he should ask her and hold on tight and never let go." Marcus pulled Rose close and kissed the top of her head. "That is good advice." "I learned from the best," Rose said. They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, holding each other and counting their blessings. They had built a good life together, had raised 3 fine children, had turned 40 acres and 10 cattle into a thriving ranch. But more than any of that, they had loved each other well and truly, through hard times and good times, through droughts and floods and everything in between. Samuel married the Johnson girl in the fall of 1891, and Marcus and Rose became grandparents for the first time in 1892, when their first grandchild, a boy, was born. Anna married her schoolteacher in 1893, and Elizabeth finally settled down in 1895 with a young rancher from the next county over. The house that had once seemed so crowded with 3 children became a gathering place for the growing family, with grandchildren running through the rooms and filling the air with laughter. Marcus and Rose grew older, but they never lost the connection they had forged that day in the mudslide. Every morning, Marcus woke up and reached for Rose, still amazed that she was his. Every evening, Rose would watch Marcus walk in from the ranch and feel her heart skip a beat, the same way it had when she first realized she loved him. In 1902, on a warm summer evening, Marcus and Rose celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, and friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate with them. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. At one point, someone asked Marcus to tell the story of how he and Rose met, and he obliged, though he had told it 100 times before. "It was May of 1876, he began, and it had been raining for 3 days straight. I was following Rose's wagon through the canyon, trying to make sure she got to Del Rio safely, when I heard the mountain start to groan." He went on to tell about the mudslide, about digging through the mud with his bare hands until they bled, about finding Rose and pulling her free. Everyone had heard the story before, but they listened with rapt attention anyway, because it was a story of love and sacrifice and hope. When he finished, Rose stood up and took his hand. "What my husband is too modest to say," she told the crowd, is that he saved my life that day, not just by digging me out of the mud, but by showing me what real love looks like. He taught me that love is not about money or status or what someone can give you. It is about being willing to bleed for someone, to dig through mountains for them, to follow them through storms just to make sure they are safe. She looked at Marcus with tears in her eyes. He has been doing that for me for 26 years, and I love him more now than I did on the day we married. Marcus pulled her close and kissed her, uncaring that everyone was watching. The crowd cheered and applauded, and someone struck up a fiddle tune. Marcus and Rose danced together under the stars, the same way they had at their wedding reception all those years ago. As they danced, Marcus thought about the path his life had taken. If he had not followed Rose's wagon that day, if he had not been there when the mudslide came down, she would have died, and he would have spent the rest of his life never knowing what he had missed. But he had been there, and he had dug until his fingers bled, and in saving her, he had saved himself. "What are you thinking about?" Rose asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Marcus said. "How one day, one moment, one choice changed everything." "I think about that too," Rose said. "And I think about how I will never stop being grateful that you chose to follow me that day." "It was not really a choice," Marcus said. "I could not help myself. I loved you too much to let you go alone." "Then I am grateful you love me," Rose said simply. They danced until the stars wheeled overhead and the music finally stopped. Their children and grandchildren went home, and Marcus and Rose were left alone in the house that had been their sanctuary for more than a quarter century. They went to bed as they always did, wrapped in each other's arms, and Marcus fell asleep thinking about how blessed his life had been. The years continued to pass, gentler now that Marcus and Rose had turned over most of the ranch work to Samuel and his family. They spent their days tending the garden, watching their grandchildren grow, and simply enjoying each other's company. They took walks in the evening, always holding hands, and they often rode out to the spot where the mudslide had been, though time and weather had long since erased any trace of it. "Do you remember what you said to me in the line shack?" Rose asked one day as they stood looking at the canyon. "When I asked you why you never spoke to me before?" "I said I had no right to approach you because I was just a cowboy with nothing to offer," Marcus said. "You were wrong about that," Rose said. "You had everything to offer. You just could not see it yet." "I see it now," Marcus said. "I see that the best things in life are not the things you can buy or the status you can achieve. The best things are the people you love and the life you build together." "Exactly," Rose said. She leaned against him, and they stood together in silence, remembering the day that had brought them together and all the days that had followed. As the sun set, they walked back to their house hand in hand, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They had weathered storms and droughts, loss and hardship, but through it all their love had remained constant, a foundation that could not be shaken. In the spring of 1910, Marcus fell ill with pneumonia. He had always been strong and healthy, but at age 69, the illness hit him hard. Rose nursed him day and night, barely sleeping, determined not to lose him. The children came with their families, filling the house with worried voices and whispered prayers. For a week, Marcus drifted in and out of fever dreams. In his delirium, he was back at the mudslide, digging desperately through the earth, calling Rose's name. Sometimes he was a young man again, following her wagon through the rain. Sometimes he was standing in the general store, too afraid to speak to her, his heart pounding in his chest. But always, Rose was there, holding his hand, her voice pulling him back from the darkness. "Stay with me, Marcus," she would whisper. "Please stay. I am not ready to lose you yet." On the 8th day, the fever broke. Marcus opened his eyes to find Rose sitting beside the bed, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. When she saw he was awake and lucid, she burst into tears. "I thought I was going to lose you," she said, gripping his hand so tight it hurt. "You will not lose me that easily," Marcus said, his voice weak but steady. "We made a promise to each other, remember? To love each other until the day we die. I am not ready to break that promise yet." Rose laughed through her tears. "You stubborn man. You scared me half to death." "I am sorry," Marcus said, "but I am still here. We still have time." And they did. Marcus recovered slowly, regaining his strength over the following months. He never quite got back to his full vigor, but he was well enough to enjoy life. He and Rose spent their days together, taking pleasure in the simple things. Morning coffee on the porch, evening walks, visits from their children and grandchildren, and the quiet comfort of each other's presence. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1916, surrounded by 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. It was a joyous occasion, full of laughter and stories and love. Marcus looked around at the family he and Rose had created and felt a sense of completion, of a life well lived. "We did all right, didn't we?" he said to Rose as they sat together watching their family. "We did better than all right," Rose said. "We did wonderfully." On a warm evening in June of 1918, Marcus and Rose were sitting on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Marcus was 77 years old, and Rose was 74. Their bodies were old and worn from years of hard work, but their love was as young and vital as it had been the day they met. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you after I pulled you from the mud?" Marcus asked. Rose thought for a moment. "You said, 'That is it. Get it out. You are all right. You are safe.' And you asked me what happened," Marcus said. "And I told you about the mudslide, and you said the most beautiful thing." "What did I say?" "You said your horses did not deserve to die that way. Even though you had just nearly died yourself, you were thinking about those animals. That was the moment I knew for certain that you were the most extraordinary person I had ever met." Rose smiled. "I think about those horses sometimes. They were good animals." "They were," Marcus agreed, "but they did not die in vain. If the slide had been a few seconds faster or a few seconds slower, you would have been killed outright, or I would not have been able to find you. Those horses slowed the wagon down just enough to save your life." "I never thought of it that way," Rose said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, and then Marcus said, "I want you to know something, Rose. Every single day of the past 42 years has been a gift. Every morning I woke up next to you, every evening we spent together, every moment we shared. It has all been more than I ever dreamed I could have. You made my life worth living." Rose turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "Why are you talking like this? You are not going anywhere." "I know," Marcus said. "I am not planning on it. I just wanted you to know, that is all, in case I forget to say it tomorrow." "You never forget to say it," Rose said. "You tell me you love me every single day." "And I will keep telling you as long as I have breath in my body," Marcus said. He took her hand, and they sat together, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was the same sunset they had watched 1,000 times before, but it was also new and precious, a gift not to be taken for granted. When the stars came out, they went inside and got ready for bed. Marcus lay down, and Rose curled up beside him, her head on his chest, the way she had the first night in the line shack more than 4 decades ago. Marcus wrapped his arms around her and breathed in the scent of her hair, still faintly touched with the lavender soap she had used since they were young. "I love you, Rose Navarro," he whispered. "I love you, Marcus Navarro," she whispered back. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the way they had for 42 years, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of disaster and built a lifetime of love from that moment. Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, his arms still wrapped around his wife. Rose woke at dawn to find him gone, and though her heart shattered with grief, she took comfort in the fact that he had left this world the way he had lived in it, loving her. The funeral was held at the church in Eagle Pass, and it seemed like the entire county turned out to pay their respects. Marcus had been well liked and respected, a man known for his honesty and hard work and the deep love he had for his family. But more than that, people came because they knew his story, the story of the cowboy who had dug through a mudslide with his bare hands to save the woman he loved, and they wanted to honor that kind of devotion. Rose stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and watched as they lowered Marcus into the ground. She did not cry, not then. She had done her crying in the privacy of their bedroom, holding his body and saying goodbye. Now she stood straight and strong, honoring the man who had given her everything. After the funeral, Rose went back to the ranch that she and Marcus had built together. The house felt empty without him, but it was still full of his presence. In every room he had built, every piece of furniture he had made, every corner of land he had worked. She walked through the rooms, touching things he had touched, remembering. Rose lived for another 8 years after Marcus died. She stayed on the ranch, cared for by her children and grandchildren, and she spent her days tending her garden and watching her family grow. She told stories about Marcus to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through her words. She talked about how he had saved her from the mudslide, how he had courted her with patience and respect, how he had built their house with his own hands and raised their children with love and discipline. She talked about the way he had looked at her even after 40 years of marriage, like she was the most precious thing in the world. On quiet evenings, Rose would sit on the porch and look at the sunset, and she could swear she felt Marcus sitting beside her, holding her hand the way he always had. She knew it was just her imagination, but it brought her comfort anyway. Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep in May of 1926, exactly 50 years after the mudslide that had brought her and Marcus together. Her family buried her next to Marcus in the cemetery outside Eagle Pass, and on her headstone they carved the words, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was loved until his fingers bled." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from Samuel to his children and then to their children. The little cabin that Marcus had built with his own hands was eventually replaced with a larger house, but the family kept the original cabin standing as a memorial, a reminder of where it all began. And on warm summer evenings, if you went out to that old cabin and sat quietly, some people swore you could see two figures on the porch, an old cowboy with scarred hands and the woman he loved, sitting together and watching the sunset, their love transcending time and death, enduring forever in the place they had built together. The story of Marcus and Rose became a legend in Eagle Pass, told and retold over the years, embellished and romanticized, but never losing its essential truth. That real love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about showing up when it matters, about digging through mud and rock until your hands bleed, about following someone through a storm just to make sure they are safe. It is about seeing someone not for what they can give you, but for who they are, and choosing to love them every single day. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on that land, still work the ranch that Marcus started with 40 acres and 10 head of cattle. They know the story of how it all began, how their great-great-grandfather saved their great-great-grandmother from a mudslide, and how that single act of courage and love created a legacy that has lasted for generations. And sometimes, on the anniversary of that mudslide in May of 1876, the family gathers at the old cabin to remember Marcus and Rose and the extraordinary love story that began with a mountain groaning like a dying beast and a cowboy who refused to give up until he found her.